Hello, everybody, and welcome to Narativ. Before we begin tonight, we have an important message. For 8 years, we've been at the forefront of investigating Russia's influence operations and the threats to American democracy. Our work has consistently broken new ground, from the original Russia House investigation in 2016 to our recent revelations about Elon Musk's role in Russia's information warfare campaign. The threats that we investigate are becoming more sophisticated and powerful. They're requiring more resources and, frankly, protection. At the same time, the platforms we rely on are increasingly hostile to independent journalists. That's why, starting immediately, we're moving to what we're calling a freemium model. And here's what that means. Key segments from each show will remain free and accessible to all. Full episodes and in-depth investigations will be available to subscribers only. And to subscribe, you'll need to go to Narativ.org, our main website, and sign up. Full episodes and in-depth investigations will be available to subscribers on our main website, Narativ.org, Narativ.org, or at our Patreon site, patreon.com/Narativ, Narativ. This also holds for podcasts. Full podcasts will no longer be available for free. You'll need to subscribe in order to watch or listen to our podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Breaking news and urgent updates on social media will remain free, and premium subscribers will get access to even more content, including exclusive briefings and analysis. This isn't just about sustainability, it's also about security. To continue our investigative work in an increasingly hostile environment, we need to build a more resilient, independent platform. For our loyal viewers who've been with us from the start, your support has made our investigations possible. The war on democracy we're documenting isn't just about election interference. It's about the future of America and American life. Thank you for being a part of our mission. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Narativ. The conventional wisdom has already crystallized. Kamala Harris lost because she failed to communicate her message effectively. She couldn't connect with voters, some people said. The economy was too bad, inflation too high. Her campaign was disorganized. On the other hand, some people said Trump was just more popular than we expected. He just had a surge among some minority groups. But both of these postmortems miss what our investigation has uncovered: a Russian-created, sophisticated information warfare operation designed specifically to divide and conquer America. Russia has spent over $45 billion and over 3 years to create an information laundering machine, a propaganda nuclear bomb, if you like, that weaponized Twitter and the right-wing echo chamber and began to promulgate Russian narratives into American minds as absolute truths. And at the center of it all was Elon Musk. Musk deployed a $45 million psychological warfare campaign targeting key voter groups. Muslims saw one version of Harris, Jewish voters saw another. Black voters were targeted with specific issues. Progressives were fed a steady diet of betrayal narratives. Normally, a campaign like that, while lavish, is allowed under FEC rules as long as it complies with those rules. But in this case, this particular campaign came out of the Kremlin. It was designed by Putin's staffers, and even Nikolai Patrushev, who is a close associate of Putin, admits that Trump won because he was supported by these external forces. Now, if this is Russian interference, shouldn't Trump be disqualified? Before you say Russia, 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 we've heard it all before, or call this a Russia hoax, you should watch tonight's show because there's plenty of evidence that proves this was no hoax. This was just the Russian playbook, how they take over democracies and cause chaos in them. Olga Lautman is a prominent researcher and expert on disinformation, specializing in tracking Russian influence operations and right-wing media manipulation strategies. Her work focuses on exposing the intricate networks of propaganda and information warfare that shape contemporary political narratives. And she joins us tonight on Narativ. Olga, welcome to the show. Welcome back. It's great to have you on. It's always a privilege to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We should mention that you're a senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, CEPA, a fantastic organization we work with on a regular basis here in helping us understand exactly how disinformation and Russia's aggressive tactics around the world have really impacted democracies around the world. But let me check in with you, if I could, on a personal basis. How are you feeling? Because I know that my feeling is we're in a daunting period, and I'm sure many of our viewers agree with that we're in a period of time where you just don't know what's going to happen, and you probably aren't expecting the best.
I actually am preparing for the worst. Everything that is happening in Russia, the same system. This is what I've been warning for the past 9 years. This is what my parents fled from, that this will happen here. I frankly cannot believe at the same time that Trump again will go to power, and that I foresee full dictatorship mode from him. He has aspired not only to be like Putin, but like the Soviets. His affinity for Russia goes back 40 plus years. He loves the power. He loves the ability to silence people, whether it be with jail or threats or whatnot. This is just who he is. And people kept asking the first 4 years, does Russia or Putin per se have compromise? This is worse than compromise. Trump actually admires this type of system. This is something that he has strived for in New York back in the 70s and 80s. He dealt with both Italian and Russian mafia. He likes that strongman mentality. So that's how I'm feeling. I'm expecting the absolute worst.
And I think we should underline, we're in this period now, it might feel like there's a little bit of normalcy going on, a little bit of peaceful transition of power seems to be happening. The normal appointments of ministers is happening, or secretaries are happening. But the truth of it is, on day one, things are going to be very different. And he's going to make as dramatic a statement as he can to enforce his power. That could be anything. And journalists in particular should probably amongst the first people to need to be wary of what will happen. We've already seen the sort of capitulation of corporate media. It's happening right now with MSNBC. There's a lot already happening. And so you got to look beyond that and say, what's next? And crack down on freedom of speech and freedom of activity, on freedom of anything, really. He's going to follow, because that is what America has voted into power. And then on top of that, the austerity package that Elon Musk is proposing with these $2 trillion of cuts, which will cut into the safety net of Americans. And Olga, you've written about this in your Substack. Tell people about where they can find the Substack, but also what you wrote about specifically to prepare people for what is coming.
So I have a Substack on masking Russia, and it's Olga Lautman Substack. And I basically put out a very full, detailed guide on every single aspect of American life that will be affected, how every single department will be weaponized, whether it's surveillance against journalists, whether it's prosecution against journalists, whether it's using the military on American people and, again, to try to quell protests. I'll also be putting out a very detailed resistor guide. Dictatorships in Russia, it's a drop different, because in Russia, the system has been like this for centuries. So it's a lot more different than per se when Ukrainians have Maidan and fought back against a corrupt figure, or protests in Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan. There are effective methods that work, so I'll be putting that out too, of how we can navigate the hell we're about to enter.
Those Substack posts sound very interesting for me, and every viewer who's watching this show should really check them out. We are entering a period of time where America has capitulated to Russia. We are surrendering to Russia. You could say it was done through the ballot box and therefore it's democratic. I don't even know. We don't know if those results are real or whatever. That regardless, we can explain tonight to people that a lot of it was a result of disinformation efforts by the Russians, by the Chinese, that certainly influenced the result of those elections. We'll go through that tonight. But this is surrender. This is a capitulation. And that is never a tough experience for everybody. America's not used to surrendering. no one can really be prepared for what they're about to go through.
Here, they definitely aren't. And at the same time, this is also for global stability. We are about to, on a global scale, see something we have never seen before. Because America always stayed either neutral and then through major world wars and major events, and then would enter later on here. Imagine that our allies will be Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, and our enemies will be European countries, South Korea, Japan, and all the other democratic loving countries. This is like a big shift from democracy to authoritarianism on a global scale.
Now, I anticipate America will still keep the appearance of being American and being part of the free world. I don't think necessarily they'll jump onto the side of the Russians or the Chinese, because that would defeat the purpose of the actual war that may follow. The reality of it is we are likely to enter a world war over this, and whether America is really on the side of the Russians or whether we're operating with our allies in NATO, maybe it may be just semantics, really, because we know who Donald Trump really has his allegiance to. But
and
still, America will operate.
Slightly differ with that, only because we saw during the first Trump term, his regime basically sided with Russia. For instance, announcing they will withdraw American troops from Germany, abandoning the Kurds in Syria, which were key allies who had helped us against Bashar al-Assad. We saw so many foreign policy moves. And if it wasn't actually for the people like Kelly and others who served as guardrails, Trump would have exited NATO then. This was like one of his main obsessions, was to get out of NATO. And it would the likes of actual American patriots like Kelly and Milley and others who prevented him from doing it. Unfortunately, those guardrails are all gone.
Yes. I agree with all of that. And yet I still think that the appearance of keeping NATO together, the appearance of performing some sort of resistance towards Russia's aggression is exactly what the architects of all of this might be wanting. Is some sort of world global conflict that results in a rearrangement of everything, which is where, when you really look at it, this is where we're heading. The world as we knew it, the chessboard that we had, has been thrown out or is about to be thrown out. And there's a new chessboard being created. And in order to create that chessboard, there needs to be some sort of conflict, which is unfortunately where we're heading into. But let's take a look at, just to prepare Americans for, they will be asking themselves, why did we let this happen? Why did we allow Donald Trump to take power when we know, as we are about to show everybody, that this was a result of a foreign influence attack, a cyber warfare attack by an enemy or multiple enemies, if you want. Tell people exactly, because you're really a prominent expert in this area. What is cyber warfare? What is this information war that we're in right now? And how does it differ from traditional war? And then how is it similar to traditional war?
Russia, going back again to the Soviet Union, they're experts in propaganda and in disinformation. This is how they kept people in control over the centuries, and this is how they kept a repressive state for centuries. Unfortunately, they carried out this warfare against the West throughout the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Luckily, there wasn't the technology to reach many people. They were happy, like the KGB was happy if they were able to place one disinformation article in a United States outlet, and that would reach very few people. Unfortunately, after Putin came in and with advances in technology and social media, he spent the first several years getting things in order and gaining full control inside of Russia because the system's corrupt. He really didn't have to do much with the system except install his loyalists in state companies and key institutions. And then by 2007, you see the shifts. The first country under attack was Estonia, when they decided to move this freaking horrific Soviet statue out of their main square and put it next to a cemetery outside of town. They basically got hit not only with cyber attacks, taking all the main government institutions and financial institutions down for quite a while, but also with disinformation operations. with propaganda, with having Russians inside of Estonia activate and start violent protests. They very quickly learned the lesson, or remembered actually the lesson, because they've dealt with this under the Soviet Union, and took care of it. And then we saw this continue on with 2008, the same hybrid warfare tactics being used when Russia attacked Georgia and seized control of their territories. Then we saw it continue on and on through, I call it, when they decided to assist Assad in keeping him in power, the disinformation that they put out, which was very effective to paint the white helmets, a civil society who was there to protect Syrians who were being massacred by the hundreds of thousands, paint them as terrorists.
Yeah, and it really changed the picture for the world. Suddenly we started accepting this genocide on a large scale. And this is now normal, it seems, that we accept genocide happening, but not perpetrated by small countries somewhere, by significant countries around the world who hold a lot of sway, a lot of power, and they're committing the most horrific acts around the world. But what you're pointing to is that this was a hybrid warfare, that there is an actual war going on. There's actual activity on the ground, a traditional war, people firing bullets and whatever have you at each other. But there's also this really thing, this is impressive, not because I'm impressed by it, but it's very well done. What the Russians have learned how to do is to project disunity into countries. They're able to tear countries apart. They're able to inject completely false narratives, completely fake information, and they're able to reach a large audience within every society that they attack in that way. This is a remarkable skill set, and one that they have professionalized in a way that the West has never really come to terms with. We do not have a weapon like this, and yet it seems to be amongst the most powerful weapons in the world. No one has tried to emulate that from an American point of view.
Or counter it. And honestly, in the 2000s, Ukraine was a testing ground for all of this. During the revolution in 2003-4, Ukraine was a testing ground. You had families and friends and people just fighting with each other. No one understood what is happening. And this was Russian disinformation seeping in, polarizing the society. And Russia tested it on basically their former hostage countries. And eventually by 2014, after the annexation of Crimea, Russia now moving towards the West. And then they start literally every single country across Europe and United States, Canada, all being the direct targets of this war. And even in 2017, I said that Russia could have launched a missile into New York, and there people at least would see Russia as an enemy. This invisible war that is happening is way more dangerous.
So the big underline for everybody is that we are in a war, and that we have been hit by a significant weapon. This is the equivalent of a nuclear weapon blowing up in huge cities in America.
A third of American population fully buys into it and sees Russia as an ally. And then the rest, for instance, in this election, voted for Trump because of disinformation that Russia was amplifying.
So that's a significant, people have not been able to understand that in America. Maybe some people have, but certainly the broad range of America has not understood that the Russian disinformation efforts, because it sounds like disinformation doesn't sound very powerful, but in reality, these are nuclear bombs that are going off in America. And I just want to point everyone, and this gets a little academic, we'll just do this quickly and then we'll go to some other stuff.
Just very quickly. Yeah. And again, I want to emphasize this is worse than nuclear bombs, because if a nuclear bomb was launched in a U.S. city, the country that launched it, people would see that as an enemy.
Yes.
Here, we have this being launched at us, and you have people who actually see Russia in a favorable light. More dangerous than this, because it's like a silent killer, like cyanide.
So the General Valery Gerasimov is the chief of staff of Russia's armed forces. Now he's in charge of this national security board or whatever they call it. But he's the guy who came up with the Gerasimov doctrine, which is the doctrine of this hybrid warfare. And I'll just quote from here. He says, you can achieve significant destruction using what the Russians call hybrid warfare, which blends military tactics, intelligence operations, influence and information campaigns, active measures, and cyber warfare. So taking all those elements together, you can basically create a hot war without bullets. This is major conflict. but you can't see the bullets. You can't see the fighting, yet you're in significant conflict with this enemy. The results are often more dramatic than conventional war and come with a deepening sense of mystery and a frustrating inability to reciprocate. As one former KGB officer said, it's not easy to find the black cat in a dark room, especially if the black cat isn't there. And we know this black cat. We can feel the black cat. We can see the black cat. We can feel the impact of the black cat, but we can't find that because, of course, it's a projection. It all comes to us projected out of Russian disinformation. And it gets amplified through this right-wing ecosystem, this powerful right-wing ecosystem. But if you look at this blue circle that I have there, that is actually Twitter, or X as it is known today. Its influence has become so large that it actually begins to dwarf these other right-wing ecosystem members like Fox News or Newsmax or OAN, even some of these local news operations like Sinclair, which is still very large. Twitter is even bigger, or X is even bigger than all of those. The right wing in America has unified around talking points around specific issues, and they're able to take these Russian-made propaganda items and they're able to amplify it into America in one voice. And that's a very powerful weapon. So talk a little bit about the amplification of Russian disinformation by right-wing media entities like Fox, like X, and all of those.
Disinformation is a huge component, but there are other components, including cyber attacks, obviously irregular military personnel and mercenaries like we've seen in Ukraine, the little green men. One of the other main components of it, besides disinformation, is political capture. Mm-hmm. Russia has successfully ran malign influence operations across Europe and US, and again, tested in Ukraine, buying political parties to carry out their foreign policy and objectives and to become traitors in their countries. We see this in US with the Republican Party, who's become cozy with Russia. We see this in Germany with the AfD party, who has become cozy with Russia. We saw this in France with Mariani and others who have gone to work for Russia, the FVD party in Netherlands. So America is not unique.
Really important to underline that they have captured the power structures that used to defend America. The GOP used to be in defense of America, and it often were Russian hawks. Now they're Russia's best friends. And you can see that captured so evidently in the way they use propaganda, in the way they use the disinformation, in their policy, and in the fact that they've practically captured all these leaders. We know that the leaders have connections. We know Donald Trump's connections to Russia. We know Elon Musk's connections to Russia. And we certainly know Mike Johnson's connections as well to Russia. There's a lot of Russian influence there, obviously.
And we've seen it in the disinformation that they parrot, because once political parties get captured, they then go ahead and now are the ones who are assisting in disinformation that is attacking America. So political capture is an extremely important. Another thing, corruption is one of the tools. Mm-hmm. The more corruption they breed into democratic societies, the more they have these societies being weakened, because corruption affects the majority of people, whereas the top tier becomes extremely wealthy, and then people start resenting institutions that they are blaming for not working for them. That's why corruption is an extremely important tool, and Russia has captured a lot across, again, in Europe, in US, across Africa with this tactic, across all democracies. And this is the most important to understand, because Americans, think, and this is why, for instance, in 2016, when Russia launched a full-scale attack on our election using multifaceted tactics, the media framed it wrong. They made it look like the Democrats versus Republicans. Meanwhile, we were the 7th country that Russia attacked elections in.
And we haven't learned the lesson, because we're still framing it as Republican versus Democrats. Yeah, and this corruption point. The corruption point is very important, because this is the gateway really for how dictatorships happen. They corrupt people at the top, and those people at the top want to maintain that power. They create this top class, this elite, this feudalist class, which are corrupt as anything, but they will do the bidding of the dictator or the leaders, because that's where they get their money from, and that's how they'll maintain it. And this is how Russia works. The oligarchy, as we like to call them in Russia. But this is really the system that will replace democracy and capitalism as we've known it in America, which is always a meritocracy, or at least attempted to be. Everyone has had a fair shot at achieving their success. And everyone had if you worked hard, you'd be able to achieve the things that you wanted to achieve in life. That is no longer going to be the way America is run. And I think people need to understand that corruption is going to get increased dramatically on January the 21st, or whatever it is that Donald Trump is inaugurated. It will ramp up very dramatically. All our resources will be nationalized or disappear somehow. I don't know. We look at Venezuela. We look at some of those countries that had enormous resources and how quickly those were captured by the Russians, by the Chinese. We're going to see the same kind of things happening in the United States. And that kind of capture is something we're not used to. We're not used to that kind of thieves really taking over our resources. We're used to people being able to achieve success through hard work. That's not always going to be the case in America.
And I just want to give you an example. So we recently saw a very wealthy person purchasing votes and basically paying for disinformation and running a whole operation to elect a pro-Russian candidate. Who do you think that is?
I know exactly who that is. Musk, obviously.
No.
Who?
It was this oligarch in Moldova who fled, who was sitting in Russia, and he was buying because the Moldovan election was the week before our election, and he was paying voters. They smuggled money into Moldova in order to pay voters to vote for the pro-Russian candidate, on top of arranging disinformation operations and leaflets and all these other things to go against Mayu.
This is why I love your experience in this topic, because this is the same thing has happened in other countries. And it's happening right now in other countries.
I gave you this example because I knew you were going to say Elon Musk.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about that, because Moldova is a country of extreme interest to Russia. It borders Ukraine. It's small. It seems insignificant, but because of where it is, it's just a very important target for Putin. And you're saying they're doing exactly the same things. I'm so glad you've mentioned that, because really when we look at what Elon Musk has done with the purchase of X, which we now know was funded by oligarchs and certainly was advised, it seems, by Putin himself, and that there was a disinformation pipeline that was actually built from the Kremlin, from Putin's office directly to Elon Musk. And that, let's put up this slide just so everyone can clearly see what I'm talking about here. This one. We can see that there was a direct line between Kiriyenko, who's the first deputy chief of staff of Vladimir Putin, but in charge of these disinformation ops, and directly connecting to Elon Musk, who would then disseminate the stuff on Twitter and X. And we've shown examples on Narativ of memes that Musk took directly from the social design agency out of Kiriyenko's design world and put it out on his audience. We also know that the oligarchs were responsible for purchasing or funding part of the purchase of Twitter and turning it into X. And then you pointed out this the other day, this suddenly reemergence of Patrushev, which we hadn't seen for a while, but clearly has been working behind the scenes, laying down the law basically onto America, saying Trump won because we helped him. And now you have obligations because of that, which is about as close to a mafia threat as you can have.
To add, in the same interview that Patrushev gave, not only did he basically say we helped and you owe us now and you must fulfill your obligations, he also mentioned how he hopes Trump isn't assassinated again. This is a mafia threat coming from the Russian state.
It really is. And these charts are going to seem too complicated for us to go through right now. But really what we've seen through Elon Musk's world is involvement with Putin and the Kremlin is that they've created an ecosystem here where they've been laundering information, which is propaganda, completely false information that comes out of Russia, attacking Kamala Harris, attacking Joe Biden, attacking America's positions around the world, especially with regards to Ukraine and other issues. And they've laundered this content into legitimate content in America. So people are believing them through these right-wing ecosystems, through these adapting the algorithms of X and those kinds of tools and tactics, and then having these paid for spokespeople out of Tenet Media, these people like Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, who many people thought were right-wing influences, but really were just are just shills for the Kremlin.
Not only shows, paid. They were getting paid $100,000 per episode.
You could not pay me any amount of money, though, to do that. And yet some people, obviously, you can. And so you've got a system here that the Russians have instituted, and it's a very careful, obvious system. This is not something we suspect. This is something we know they did in order to introduce lies, fabrications, and complete disinformation into the system to damage our democratic candidates, our candidates running for president and into these other positions. It is not a normal thing. This is an attack on our system. This is something that has permeated our society, so we accept it. But truthfully, this is a weapon that is so powerful and is laundering information into the American system. And this is why we have a Donald Trump presidency. They didn't just do this. They didn't pay $44 billion for Twitter for fun. They knew they could launder this information and they could win control of the United States by laundering this information into the system. So talk about this laundering process, because it is, we're used to seeing money laundering, but there's information laundering.
It's information laundering. And I just want to add that over the past decade, the far right has been the primary vehicle for disseminating this information. But historically, and yet again, we see the far left has also become a vehicle, and they've continued, depending on what it is. Their focus usually is on the Middle East and on South and Central America, but they've continued to do it because Russia's goal is, Russia doesn't have an ideology. Russia has no ideology. So their main concern is, one, to spread and polarize and divide and conquer. So they will support extremes on both ends. They, on one hand, will be spreading disinformation against trans. On the other hand, supporting trans movement.
Yeah, this is actually something Elon Musk did with this $45 million campaign. He was targeting Muslim and Jewish voters with opposing views in order to divide and create distrust. And you see it in this chart here, the things that they did. The Muslim voters got pro-Israel, Harris, and then there's stuff about her husband through social media and what have you. It ended up suppressing the Muslim vote. Jewish voters got anti-Israel arms policy stuff. So contradictory information being sent to opposing groups. They don't care. They don't care that.
And they did this. We saw a decade ago when they would set these type of opposing protests, where it's Second Rights Amendment protests. I remember in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at 12 p.m. And then an anti-gun protest arranged at 12 p.m. in Harrisburg.
Just to create as much tension as they can.
Exactly.
And then you create distrust. And
to the center, which is the majority of the people in any country, they want to shut their voices down by amplifying both.
Right. But this is a $45 million actual thing. People need to remember. This is something that is actually what Elon Musk paid for on behalf of the Russians. We should assume, but we don't know that for sure. But where else is this money coming from? But he was the guy responsible for this particular PAC who farmed out this information in order to divide and conquer for Donald Trump, the elections. This is not conjecture again. I just want people to understand that there is a lot of money spent by the Russians to get Donald Trump elected, to confuse the electorate, to lie to the electorate, to inflame parts of the electorate, which is why this is not a normal election. This was not a normal election. If you really, at the end of the day, we can say it any way we want, but the truth of this was not a normal democratic election in America.
Since 2016, and maybe even before, but I just want to make one point that right now the election is over, but Russian trolls and bots and information warfare operations are not. They sit 24/7 looking for vulnerabilities, looking for any kind of divides in our society to latch on. So maybe this wasn't done overnight, but for the past, since COVID, Russia has been amplifying, has been putting disinformation and amplifying economic anxiety concerns. They have been amplifying about inflation, about immigration, which, by the way, Russia may very well be responsible with flooding our border because they have a lot of loyalists between Venezuela and other Central and South American countries. And Russia ran the same operations in Belarus.
They've done in Belarus. Remember what they're running their immigrants into Poland?
Getting immigrants from the Middle East, putting them on a plane, flying them into Minsk, driving them to the border to try to crash the Lithuanian and Polish borders.
And China, of course, is behind there funding all of this. China's where the funding comes from, and they have ties to Latin American countries. There's a way for the two countries to work cooperatively with some, and Iran. What I really wanted people to take away today is this was not business as usual. This is not democracy as usual. The election of Donald Trump was not. Yes, he won. Technically, he won, but he won because Russia was very heavily involved in the process, in disinformation, but also on the ground on the day with the bomb threats and with the false information. There was all these issues that showed up during the day. All of that was created by Russia, fed through Elon Musk. He was the key funder of the Trump PAC, $118 million to Donald Trump. We know he's tied to Kirienko, and we know he's tied now to Patrushev and to these oligarchs who funded the purchase of these. So there's no mystery here. We know this is how Donald Trump was elected.
Same with the Heritage Foundation, because prior to their involvement in U.S. election, they were busy the past few years on behalf of Russia trying to stop aid to Ukraine. They have the network with the tentacles that reach all the conservative and Republican and religious groups across the country. So this is another group that cannot go under the radar and now will end up overturning our institutions with their Project 2025 plan.
So you're absolutely 100% correct. And so those people who are saying Kamala Harris ran a weak campaign, she lost because she wasn't able to communicate a decent economic policy or whatever it was, this is not the case. She was very effective as a spokesperson. She said what she needed to say. She's a very competent, good leader, as good as you could probably imagine under these circumstances to step in for somebody. And yet the ability of the Democratic Party to overcome these influence operations is just not there. We just don't have the power to fight what these guys have built. And that's how powerful this weapon is that's attacked America. No, these were not free and fair elections in the way they would normally be. These were influenced elections. People have to decide how they want to respond to this. How do they want to respond to the fact that this was not a legitimate election, and what's about to happen to America is so dramatic. We will never recognize America after this if Donald Trump takes power again. We'll never recognize it.
And I just want to ask anyone walking away and saying what happened in 2020, why did Trump lose? Two reasons. One, Russia did run operations. I monitored them. I documented them very publicly and privately of what was happening. But Russia ran like a normal operation, hit on Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, using cutouts of their Russian agents in Ukraine. But Russia had, the Kremlin has a mentality of once you have power, you hold on to power. Like they don't understand anything else. Like over the past century, you're either executed or you hold on to power. There's no in between. So with their mentality, with their mindset and their mentality, they assumed, being that Trump was already in office in 2020, that he would be confident enough to keep power with having control of the Justice Department and other institutions. They weren't, obviously, they miscalculated. He wasn't, because we had a lot of people loyal to the Constitution who basically put a roadblock every single which way when he attempted to overturn the election before January 6th. So this is why they didn't put 100% into the 2020 election, because once a strong man is in power, they just don't get out of power. They don't understand that could have happened. And this is why the 2020 election, they did put focus, but they didn't put their 100% behind it. This election, they needed to. Their own existence as a country, the ability to overcome Ukraine, hinged on Trump winning. If Harris would have won, Russia is on its way to collapse. Their financials and economy are right now, we'll see even how they'll make it to Trump for him to reverse everything. This was one of their most important elections in the history of modern Russia, was to get Trump in, one, or Ukraine, two, to remove all the sanctions off of Russia that is basically putting their economy on the brink of collapse.
America has a choice, really, still. This has not happened yet. We still have an inauguration. They certainly have committed to a peaceful transfer of power, but as we know, there's so much information about disinformation and propaganda and influences and what we expect will happen, that in the national interests or national security interests of a country, should it happen, is a conversation we should be having. Now, the left-leaning media has been silenced. The mainstream media no longer operates as it should, right? And we're seeing what's going on at MSNBC. And I'm hoping that there are still reasonable people in power there who are actually having these conversations, and that we're going to see at least an understanding of how we're going to mitigate or get through this process in a way that is not going to hurt America's national interests.
Unfortunately, I think that's not going to happen. Trump will be inaugurated, and I do think we just need to prepare, but also resist, because the most important is resisting. You can't look at a small action and say, oh, this is not worth my time. It's not as egregious, because all the small actions, add up. He will create the most egregious, horrific scenario that we have ever seen shortly after he steps into office in order to desensitize us. Because if you have the most egregious, horrific things happening, other things that might happen that normally would have been a scandal or something to speak out about become pale. They pale in comparison.
Yeah.
So we have to prepare for it. And we just need to push forward. People in the background are discussing how to protect our national security and how to protect the American people. In the case they're not, we're going to have to all stick together and deal with this ourselves. It is possible.
It is possible. Resistance has happened. We've all lived, I've lived through it in South Africa. You've lived through it in different parts of the world. We know that it can be done. It's not easy.
Now, do I think America long-term will turn into an authoritarian state? No. I do think short-term, the foreseeable future, maybe decade even, could be, I don't know the length of time. But I do think that America was built on a revolution. You have a lot of revolutionaries here. You have that spirit. And that people will step up eventually once things get unbearable for them in their own personal lives. Like they have to feel it, unfortunately, in order to act. But unfortunately, here we are, and now we just have to navigate forward.
Olga Lautman, thank you so much for being on the show again. We have to do another one soon because I feel like there's a lot of territory we still need to cover. Tell everyone about your Substack again.
It is Olga Lautman at Substack.
Olga Lautman is really one of the preeminent experts in all of this. She understands the disinformation. She understands what's coming, and she is certainly someone to follow on Substack or wherever you follow your influences. She is certainly one to follow, and we thank her very much for being on the show.
Good night.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narativ, where truth lives.